much about all of the schools that were in BC, but I really lucked out. The teacher I had was very inspiring. She was 20 years in the field and was doing her Master's of Education at UBC. And she told us right off the bat, she was very honest, she said, 5 years and you're going to probably burn out. You might want to leave. She wasn't pulling any punches about the wages. She said, you know, it's physical work, but I'm 5 years in and I still want to be here. Yeah. I went back to school, night school. I've been working in the same place now for about 3 years, and I was going to work full-time and going to school 2 nights a week, pardon me. During that time, when I was doing a post-basic certification, I got a little bit more political. I never thought I'd want to get into politics when I was a child or a teenager, but I realized how political that early childhood education can be. And I felt like it was my responsibility to give back a little bit. So I started getting involved in ECEBC and the Vancouver branch, and I've learned a lot, and I've learned a lot about what I can do. And at work, you know, I try to encourage my coworkers to go to different types of workshops and perhaps go back and get a post-basic, learn more about what they can do to make their wage and their working conditions better. But it's not everybody that's interested in those things, so I can sometimes become frustrated. Not everybody has been open to the early learning framework because it's fairly new. It's only been 8 or 9 years here in BC, and so I work with one woman who's been in the field for 20+ years, and she doesn't feel like she wants to go that route, so that can be frustrating for me. But I also work with a woman who was an educator in the Philippines, specifically an elementary school teacher, and she wants that recognition that she had when she was working in the Philippines. She wants that idea of being a professional and being looked at as a professional. Sometimes I talk to people, I tell them what I do, get mixed reactions, but the people that tell me that they really appreciate what I do, it feels good, and I think part of my responsibility too is to educate the public about what we do and what it means and how important children are to society and how we affect that in a positive way.
Great, thanks a lot, Randi. Yeah, we wanted to talk a little bit about the education issue because I know with the $10 a day daycare plan that ECEBC is putting forward, there's in it hope to have a ECE bachelor as the standard. So with that comes a lot of complications. So I just was wondering, and you know, how to professionalize, but as Val actually used the expression of credential creep. So Val, I was just wondering if you could pick up on some of that, speaking as somebody as a union representative and how education fits into that.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for allowing me to be here to talk with you and learn more about the work that you do. I want to let you know that HSA is a union, and it does represent some 75 professions, members working in healthcare as well as community social services, folks in child development centers and transition homes, and our membership is 85% female. So I understand what it feels like to be from a sector that is largely female. I think in terms of the in 2011, when the community plan first came out, HSA's board of directors endorsed that integrated early learning, early care and learning advanced by ECEBC and the Coalition of Child Care Advocates BC, because it was a comprehensive plan and it had professionalization as a key element. I think it's important when you have an area of work where there is such diversity right now that you have to come together and amongst yourselves determine what is going to be your baseline for education and working in this field. And, you know, whether that's certification or diploma or it's bachelor's, whatever you think is the most appropriate level that is required to do the work that you do is what you should be influencing decision makers with. So that, excuse me, there is this tendency, as Eve has referred to, of credential creep. So in my profession, I am a physiotherapist. When I trained, I got a bachelor's degree. That has now changed here in British Columbia at the University of BC, where it is now a master's degree. And we were pressured to do that because the rest of the world was going in that direction. And as you know, the United States, how they do things often influences how we do things. And so their training schools were going to a master's level, and we followed suit. Now, what's happening in the United States is physiotherapy is becoming a PhD program. And so you look at that and say, is that what is needed on the front lines of care? Is that what that patient needs to help them get over that broken bone in their leg? Or is PhD really for teaching, research, but not for frontline? And if we're going to make it the standard of entry into the profession, I mean, the training schools are laughing, right? Because they keep students longer, they're making more money off that. Unfortunately, students will have higher debts when they graduate, right? So it is a difficulty not only thinking about your profession and where you want to go, but in many professions in the caring services, that we do see this credential creep. And so I think it's going to be up to you to work and think about this and like I say, influence decision makers as to how you are going to say, we believe this is the acceptable standard for frontline work in our field.
Great, thank you. Yeah, my experience, I have used every childcare model possible over the years, and I was bringing this up because my son was at some after-school program, and there was some young guy who just played ball hockey out back, and nothing could be better for my son at that point is to play ball. And so when I'm thinking, okay, now everyone has to have a master's or a bachelor's in ECE, does that always work? And one of the things Elaine was talking about in her appreciative inquiry, that there's a real powerful sense of inclusion among early childhood care workers, and they want to be inclusive, and knowing that there's such not just a diversity of ages, but diversity of purpose. So one kid needs some after school care, but another is doing preschool from 9 till 5, and so they're very different needs, and so how to bring all that together. And I was interested in, Elaine talked about how she was moving forward with appreciative inquiry and where that went also with the balance between a professional association and a college. Do you want to speak to that?
All the time. Good. I am from Nova Scotia, so I'm not very versed in your situation. So what I'll be talking about, and I hope it's not too overbearing for you, is I'll be talking to you from the Nova Scotia experience. Our goals reflect the achievement of ECEs in Nova Scotia being recognized as professional. All the work that the Nova Scotia Child Care Association does is dedicated to increasing our members' professional ECE practice and supporting it. Supporting them by providing resources, collegial dialogue, and promoting recognition and collaboration amongst practitioners within the sector, collateral services, government, and society. In 2015, we launched our professional recognition project with a work plan that includes scans of literature on professional infrastructure components, professionalization processes, and professional recognition models. We also are beginning our consultation with our members and related organization regarding the form that this professional recognition might take in the sector, and we're also doing a comparative worth study. We hired Christine Forsyth, an expert in professional self-regulation, to explore 3 questions. What is professional recognition? What does professional representation or regulation mean? And what does professional representation look like? The result of her investigation of these questions is our dialogue paper called Pathways to Professional Recognition. And you can get that on the Nova Scotia Child Care Association website. There are 2 types of professional representation, which are 2 models, but there are many permutations that you can do of combining different aspects of the models together. Professional associations represent the members' interests and help ensure ethical and professional practice. So that would be for the individual ECE practitioners or ECEs. And again, our name is something that is very fluid, and so I'm trying to just use a similar one, but it could be any one that we come up with. It operates in the membership's interests. So it provides conferences like this one. It provides various kinds of support in terms of resources and a place to meet, that sort of thing. It's collegial. A professional self-regulatory body, or it's often called a college of ECEs, represent the public interest by legally ensuring safe and competent service delivery by members of a profession. So the resources of that, in a professional association, the ECE trumps any other groups. And whereas in a professional college, it operates in the public interest, and that public interest is about ensuring that ECEs provide safe, ethical, and good service to the public or a vulnerable population for the children, and that the government gives you legal regulation authority to deal with any breaches of that. So it's very different. And so it's not about recognition, a college. It's about accountability to society as a whole for taking care of children and maximizing their growth and development. Both types of organizations inspire a culture of professionalism and promote a qualified, trustworthy, and ethical practice. We are now in the process of stimulating a dialogue within the sector, and this is where the appreciative inquiry comes from, to develop a shared understanding of what professional and professional recognition might mean. And we also want to talk about what professional recognition for ECEs could look like in Nova Scotia and plan on how it could be achieved. Considerations which were identified as we reflected upon possible forms that professional recognition could take were the resources necessary for managing a college, both in terms of funding and liability, are a reality that we must deal with. A budget of at least $1 million per year is necessary, regardless of the number of members you have. And membership is mandatory, and the source of funding fees are high. In Nova Scotia, we have approximately 3,000 practitioners, so at least $350 would be for membership fees as mandatory. This has an impact on us moving the professional recognition project forward on our association, since we would be, in a sense, because our membership is voluntary, we would be in competition to get members. So to support a professional association and a professional regulatory body, the salaries of ECEs have to be addressed in Nova Scotia. Current salaries are a major barrier in our work to achieve professional recognition. Okay. Another thing we found out, the reason for a professional regulatory body must be around the provision of safe care. I already talked about that. And the reason for a professional association is to support early childhood practitioners in providing professional practice. It's an interesting dialogue that is challenging at times. Question arises, is it our association's responsibility to move the sector towards professional regulation, or are we one part of the shared sector responsibility? Will the resulting form be at the expense of our association? And we're working on ways to address that.
If I can just jump in with a little bit of this. So the question is, we want to be a college. Can I just use that word as a college? Because there is regulation in an association as well. Is there not some?
Not in a professional association,
Okay.
no. The regulation comes from the provincial licensing standards.
Okay. So we have a college on one hand with the regulation versus an association.
Yes.
And the hope is that they're both working in concert, in that it's all, you know, the association wants safe children as well. But where the focus is going to be is different. One is about excluding, to a certain extent, gatekeeping, keeping up standards. The other is more about supporting the sector and pushing it forward. And a key component, if I'm hearing you right, is the cost, because you have to hold that liability if you're going to be a college. And so if you're a big organization, you're saying that in Ontario that they've done this, maybe they can support it, but someplace like Nova Scotia, that would be a real challenge.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I agree.
Sir. Yeah.
As the dialogue proceeds, we continue to develop. What we decided to do was make ourselves indispensable before the big college comes along, so that people got, I don't want to say bang for the buck, but that they got, so they knew what they were getting for their membership fees. And so we've incorporated aspects of professional recognition into our strategic plan. So I hope you will take a look at our website, nschildcareassociation.org, because we have the information all on there. And I'm also giving a workshop tomorrow afternoon on with a little bit more in depth of these struggles we're having. Well, not struggles. This is exciting and interesting dialogue.
Right. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. So Donna, you were sort of following earlier, you were talking a little bit about Ontario and how it has gone the college route, and it was been a bit of a challenge in Ontario. And that's the perspective Don can bring as being more of having a national perspective.
And in fact, is Lindsay McDonald, are you here? Carolyn Ferns? They were presenting. I don't see them raising their hands. So Lindsay and Carolyn are actually both from Ontario. And Lindsay is the executive director of the your counterparts in Ontario, the Association of Early Childhood Educators of Ontario. And so, yeah, the province of Ontario, and sorry for those of you who heard me speak at my workshops yesterday, I'm going to be repeating myself here a little bit, but that's okay, because you actually have to hear something 3 times before it really absorbs. So, province of Ontario a number of years ago instituted a College of ECE, and so a College of ECE, as Elaine just explained, is not where you go to study, but it is about professional practice. But at the end of the day, a college, be it the College of Physicians and Surgeons, be it the College of Nurses, be it the College of whatever, fill in the blank, is about public safety. It is about protecting children in this case. So one of the things that I get asked a lot about when I go across the country and go to conferences like this is, oh, that's the magic bullet for our sector. No, it is not. It is a part of a solution, but it is not the solution, because a college does not advocate on your behalf. College does not talk necessarily about salaries and whatnot. Doesn't talk necessarily about what quality practice is. So that's an important distinction that you have to make. It is a part of a solution, could be, but it is not the solution. And you know, the interesting thing as well that happened in Ontario, because again, that's the only province or jurisdiction in Canada that has a college, is that you have to belong to the college to call yourself an early childhood educator. You have to. You cannot work in a child care program and say, oh, I'm an ECE, unless you belong to the college. And then by such, you have to have a membership, right? Of course, you belong. So again, if Lindsay was here, I think it's around, it's $150 to $200 a year, something like that, okay? What happened though, the real-time experience was that the professional association took a hit. If I had to belong to one group, it had to be the college, because that affected my practice, because I had to belong to that to actually be an ECE and be paid as an ECE. And so that took membership away from the professional association, which in turn affected the work of the association. So that'd be no different than if the province of BC said, oh, we're going to set up a college here, and potentially ECEBC, BC Aboriginal Child Care Society, the BC Family Child Care Association could all be affected because they no longer have that revenue coming in from the membership dues. Because let's be honest, who here in this room makes what they are worth? Right? This is a sector that struggles with its own economic security. Right? And so if you have to belong to one, and this is about your economic security, you are going to belong to the college. It's as simple as that. So it is a mature conversation, a complex conversation that you have to have within yourselves, whether this is the route that you want to go. And be very, very aware of the consequences, unintended consequences, I might add, of what could happen.
So then when you are looking at other provinces, okay, Ontario and that route may not be the best, but you were talking earlier about PEI and Manitoba. But PEI having a very strong early childhood education sector. What have they done?
Yeah, PEI, so a number of years ago, the province of Prince Edward Island actually went out and did a commission and said, we need to do better for PEI children. And we need to actually develop a system, a child care system, but not just child care, but a related system that supports children, supports families, and puts them at the core of all the services and all the programs that are out there. And so when I look out, and there may be some that would argue with me on this point, but I look out at PEI as one of the real shining examples in this country right now that is really trying to do it right. It's not perfect. Again, it is not perfect, but they're trying to do it right. So just specifically around the workforce, they actually have set pay scales for the workforce. No matter where you work, if you are in a licensed, regulated child care program, you will know what you get paid in that program. You could pay more, but there is a minimum that's there. And I'm not talking minimum wage. I'm talking better than minimum wage. But again, it's not great. Okay, it's not where it should be. If you move over to Quebec, Quebec actually has pay equity for its workforce, again in the licensed and regulated sector. They have a pension plan for its workforce. Zoom over to Manitoba. Manitoba has a pension plan for its workforce. So talking about the economic security of all of you, an actual pension plan? And I know as I look out here, we've got folks that are at the beginning of their careers, middle, and towards the end. I just said towards the end. That's all I said. Maybe you're 35 and retiring. I don't know. But a pension plan, we talked about this yesterday. Imagine that. Not just an RRSP plan, I mean a vested pension plan when you retire that gives you economic security, or at least an enhancement of your economic security. That's huge. So there are some really interesting policy things, and that, by the way, that's publicly funded. That's not privately funded, sorry. That is publicly funded by the province of Manitoba and the province of Quebec. Right? So there are some really good examples out there. Again, these are works in progress, because just like a college isn't a magic solution, there is no magic solution other than to think about how does each piece move within our system, how do we move forward, and let's get each piece moving forward together.
Right, thanks, yeah. How do we bring in that supply, funding the supply side? I don't know if Val or Elaine can speak to that. It's just, earlier, Elaine, you said something about the privatization of the family. That was an expression that you used. And that's sort of a tradition. One of the challenges that the early childhood education sector has had, it's seen as kind of a domestic, an outgrowth of the domestic part of life, and so it hasn't had that kind of support. Can you speak to that?
Well, in digging down, which we'll be doing a little bit later too, we went, okay. Would you give me the question again? I'm retired. I lose it. I didn't write it down.
When we talked the other day,
yep.
You used the expression, the privatization of the family.
Right.
And I think there's privatization of the family versus public funding and the supply side.
Yes. When we look at recognition and respect for early childhood and the people who provide it, there are a number of systemic barriers that are in our whole society. One of them is the fact that, and Val mentioned this, about the fact that we are mostly women and how women are viewed in society. One of them is about we're a caring profession. The other one is about privatization of the family. And privatization of the family, I don't know where it comes from, but it's about the fact that parents have their children and you take care of your children unless you're incompetent or incapable in terms of resources and actually skill levels. That's when society will kick in and start taking care of your children. And so that's one of the systemic barriers that we deal with. It's the whole idea about should we be taking care of other people's children? And if so, should society provide the resources in order to do that in a manner that's going to maximize children's development, which really is what Don was speaking to about Quebec and Manitoba. So obviously there's been a paradigm shift in those provinces that yes, and it's a very social democratic kind of shift, yes, we will take care of the children because the better we take care of our children, the better our social and economic welfare as a province is going to be. And so then yes, we won't sort of only take care of your children if you are unable to take care of them in a manner that's going for your skills level, and actually it's often financial resources available too.
Right, thanks, yeah. Randi, about I think a component of that is the $10 a day daycare system. What have you thought about that? That's been an issue in BC and sort of bringing forward. You also talked earlier when we were talking about talking a little bit about respect and getting respect from parents and sort of coming from a place of strength, and that it's not always there, or the respect is not always there, and perhaps something like the $10 a day can do that.
Yeah, there's one parent that comes to mind who often will come to pick up their child and will watch us with the other children, and it's a father, and he'll just look at me and he'll put his hand on my shoulder and he'll be like, "You're amazing." And that to me, like, he sees that I am doing something different than he has a skill set for. Like, he knows that I have knowledge that, you know, he's gained through being a parent, but not maybe to deal with children in a large setting, or to deal with a child who is having multiple meltdowns during the day, or to deal with a child who needs, you know, support in a way that he's not familiar with. So that feels good. But sometimes you have parents, and I'm thinking back a few years when I was subbing, a parent who would just come and not even say hello, just drop their child off and leave, and that bad, you know, and it's no different than somebody standing on the corner working for an organization, and you know, people just walk past and don't say hello, or they have their earphones in and they don't even look up. You know, it's the same. It hurts. It doesn't feel good. So that, I think, is really affects me in a big way. But I've been thinking about this a lot lately, about the $10 a day program, about the fact that the province and maybe even Canada don't know what we do. They don't know what we've learned. Some of them may, obviously the people in the sector know, but just the general population, and they don't see what happens. They have an image in their mind about, oh, they gave hugs and put on Band-Aids and baked cookies, you know, and that's lovely, and yes, sometimes we do that, but there's a lot more substance there, and I worry about society not caring about children. That scares me, and just as I worry about them not caring about the elderly. You know, there's other countries in like Scandinavia where they care about all their citizens. It doesn't matter that those citizens aren't making money or they're not, you know, like being productive in society, whatever that means. They're caring for them, and I think the $10 a day cares for everybody. You know, it allows women to work if they choose to work. It allows families to have more income to spend on each other or their child's future education or a family vacation so they can spend time together. It allows us to have a better quality of life and feel proud about what we do because it is important. So to me, even though it's going to take a decade to fully come around, I think it's important to talk to people, and I do. I talk to other classmates, women who have been in the field for years and don't even know that it exists, and that worries me too. So as much as I can, I'm putting up posters in the center, I'm talking to my classmates, I'm talking to people. I want them to know that it's there and it's possible, and that's another thing. People don't think that it's possible, and there's been a lot of research about the benefits and that it can be done, but if people don't know, they're not going to care.
That's great, yeah. Is one of the things you were talking before is the inconsistency within center to center, and you know, this whole trying to push to elevate the sector and elevate what you do. There needs to be a recognition that what you do, and part of that comes from standards and just a consistency from one daycare center to another. You said when you're bopping around doing lots of subbing, it was very random, and even in the center you're at, there's no one really overseeing it. You're comparing to a teacher. You've got a district, you've got a school board, you've got all these people who are setting standards and raising it, whereas a daycare, so yeah, you've got maybe somebody, a licensing officer come in once in a while, but it doesn't have that kind of oversight and consistency.
Yeah, we did talk a bit about that, and you know, we do have licensing officers, and even in my basic program, my instructor talked a little bit about that, about how there's different philosophies, and you know, we've all been through programs and we know a few different types, and something like a college or more restriction might take some freedom away from that. It might exclude some of those philosophies, and that could be, you know, detrimental in some ways. But in other ways, it could also allow people to have a better idea, just following one stream to know what we're doing. And I think the BC Early Learning Framework, both the Aboriginal and the, you know, both of them, they give some consistency, but then is everybody using it? If they're not using it, why? And you know, how can we make sure everybody is interested in exploring that? Because not everybody is. Yeah.
Okay. And Val, this is another part of the union coming in as another way of consistency and bringing people together and having certain standards and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so you look at professional associations, and they're there to advocate for your profession, to highlight the value of it to the public. When you look at colleges, they're there to protect the public so that people know they're going to you for your services, and that you have credentials, you have a level of education, and you are qualified to do what you say you can do. And as Don said, there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, and not one thing is the answer. Colleges, to me, are a blessing and a curse, because they are a blessing in that they protect the public. The public has somewhere to turn if they've gone to a practitioner and they don't feel that they've gotten good care, or they have questions about that care, they turn to a college. But for those of us who belong to a college, and I've had about 20 years in a college in my profession, the issue of continuing competency is one that we have wrestled with, and which the government continues to try and influence. It used to be that we were just going to have a portfolio, and you would keep your own portfolio and document the continuing education you were doing, the journals you were reading, the in-services you went to, and you kept a log to that could be called upon by your college at any given time and reviewed to ensure that you were keeping up with your profession. And now the government has moved away from that, and now they're looking more at exams. And so, you know, every 5 years or so, we're going to put you through an exam process. And if you fail that exam, well, there's not much they can do for you, because they don't have anybody who can help work with you on the areas that you were weak on to build you up to strength. Your workplace may not have that either, so we'll just keep giving you an exam. And so, you know, be aware that colleges have their pitfalls as well, and it's usually around that area of how do you establish continuing competency. So now let's throw another issue into the picture and say, you know, what's the value of a union? And so having a union and a collective agreement guides both employers and employees. And so issues such as wages and benefits and working conditions are negotiated in the interests of both parties. And so the resulting negotiated collective agreement is a legally binding and enforceable document signed by both parties, the union and the employer. And the structure of a collective agreement gives employers and employees certainty about what working conditions are, and also about employees' performance expectations and quality of service. Okay? And so in a sector sometimes like yours, where nonprofit agencies are governed by volunteer boards that often find themselves slipping beyond governance and going into the operation and the day-to-day of what you do in your work, that union contract does help to ensure that the relationship between the employees and the employer is structured. And boards should focus on fulfilling the mandate of their organization and their mission and values around what care they provide for children. So the value of a collective agreement is around certainty and fairness and the conditions in your workplace. And as a union, we advocate for your professions, and we look at saying if you have different levels of expertise in your profession, then we're going to try and get different levels of recognition in terms of wages for additional expertise. We've already heard Don say about pensions, and some of us are very fortunate to be in pension plans, and we view those as paycheck for life, and it's an amazing thing to have, and we certainly advocate on behalf of all our members to get those kind of benefits. So being in a union has its value in terms of regulating that workplace, and it does help to give you more respect and recognition for the work that you do.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's just one more element. It's like there's the association, the college, the union, all these things come together to raise the sector. I was just going to ask Don about, we talked a little earlier about the $10 a day plan. I think as you said at the time, ECEBC did a great job in putting that forward just during this election, in that it was so well thought out. There was a lot of research. It was costed. It shows how this is going to save the economy, save money in the long run, etc. And one of the things we talked earlier, so if you speak to that, but also the whole knowledge gap that we had talked about, because that can only come together, that plan, the $10, when you've got a lot of data, you got a lot of evidence-based research and information.
Yeah, I'll just add one more thing about a college of ECE, by the way. You know, now let's just say you slip up and you get in trouble with your boss because you did something wrong in your program. There's a college, you could now be called in front of your college board, and there's a whole disciplinary process where you actually now have to justify what happened or defend what happened, and you could be stripped of your right to practice if you were found in violation of the ethics and whatnot. So I think, you know, that's another important piece that you need to remember. And I'm not saying that to say that a college is a bad thing, by the way, right? Don't get me wrong. Anyways.
Donna, I'm just going to say that most unions will represent members when they have those kind of disciplinary hearings at a college.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you.
Yeah, and to the same point, that can give a certain leverage or status to the industry or the sector if they know there is that as well. Yeah.
So to speak to the $10 a day plan, or just, you know, one of the other things, the parallel to the $10 a day plan is what we as an organization worked on with some national partners, which is what we called the shared framework, which we gave to the federal government. But they both come from the same place. They come from a place where we've taken the research, where we've taken what we know about best practice and how to build a system, and controlled that conversation. Said to government, especially here in BC, here's the issue, here's the many issues and problems, and we are giving you a solution to that. That's powerful. I've sat across from many politicians, elected officials, et cetera, when you go to them and they say, well, what do you want? Slide that piece of paper across the desk, this is what we want. And it's rooted in evidence, it's rooted in best practice, and if you look at it, you cannot deny the evidence and the facts that are in there. That is powerful, powerful stuff. But you have to be clear. Just because you've made a convincing case does not mean that all of a sudden the politician across from you is going to say, oh, thank goodness, you solved it. Let's get on with this right now. Right? That, as you know, does not happen. That didn't happen with the federal government in this last budget. It's not happening in BC as of right now. Well, maybe it happens next week. I don't know. Yeah, fingers crossed, right? This, you know, we talked about it yesterday again. The evidence and the facts behind why we need universally accessible, high-quality, affordable childcare, not just for BC families, but for Canadian families, is abundant. I scratch my head daily. Why are we not getting further quicker? But then I ground myself a little bit and I look at the fact, as an organization, we're celebrating 30 years this year. That's pretty new. I think we've made an amazing amount of headway, believe it or not, in those 30 years as a sector. When we look at the education system, which is, you know, the closest cousin, if you will, I think, to what we do, they've been around for a really long time. And they've achieved what they've achieved over a long time and purposely done. A lot of lessons for us to be learned there. And so tied to that then is under our previous federal government, if you don't know this, in 2006, when they took office, the very first thing they did as an act of government was eliminate the early learning and childcare agreements with the provinces and territories of Canada. We were poised 12 years ago to have a national childcare system in this country. The first act, I cannot repeat that enough, the first act of that government was to cancel that. And along with that came the cancellation of research, data gathering, and every other piece of evidence that we could have done nationally to move ourselves forward. ECEBC and the the Child Care Advocates of BC and others came up with the $10 a day plan. That is filling some of that gap. The sector taking responsibility for itself to provide solutions and policy frameworks for moving forward. That was an important step. We now on the national level to support that and enhance that are catching up. We're lucky, quite frankly, as an organization to still be alive. Because what happened in the mid-2000s was a lot of organizations that where their focus was children and women especially got cut. They couldn't survive. We somehow managed to stay alive, and I think for the better, because we're still trying to, you know, go to that dream, that national dream that, again, this is not just about BC's children and families, it's about Canada's children and families. We should never forget those lessons we learned. We should always hang our hats on the fact that we have got abundant evidence, facts, and I think, quite frankly, majority of public support that knows this is an issue, that we need to do better for families and children on the child care front, and the $10 a day plan absolutely addresses that.
What are the arguments? Does this exclude anyone? Because I wonder if there are some people with their private daycare in the basement, whatever. Are some people, some child care providers, feeling threatened by this? To Don and also Elaine.
So do you mean by the $10 a day plan, or
Yes.
just national child care framework, that sort of thing?
The $10 a day program, where it becomes more regulated, this elevating the sector, because some people could be out of work if all that happens.
I suppose that's real, right? And one of the things, do you ever hear this? It's about choice, right? It's all about choice. But is there a real choice? I challenge you with that. Is there a real choice for families? The data on working mums is that well over 70% of mums, even with a 0 to 2-year-old, are in the workforce. Ramp that up to age 12 and it's like 84%, 86%, something like that. So that ship sailed. Families need care. We know that. Now, Canada and BC have created an ad hoc system. That's what it is. It's an ad hoc system where you've got enough regulated, licensed childcare in this country for 25% of the children who need it. 25%. So where are the other 75%? Where are they? If we care for ages 5 to 18 in the education system, we care for 18 and plus in colleges, universities, and whatever they do, if we care for our seniors, you said it before, then we have to care for young children.
All right, thank you. Yeah.
And so I think, and I don't use this word to be mean, but if there are changes that have to happen to build systems for young children, then that is what happens.
Right. Okay. And Elaine, just picking up on that in your appreciative inquiry and the idea of inclusiveness, and one of the things you found is wanting to not leave some of those people behind. You're talking about grandmothering some things, but also how to create a system that can still be inclusive, move forward with something like the $10 a day, but still be inclusive.
Yes, that's really related to a lot of our owning our words and meanings of what is the scope of practice in order to practice as an ECE. What are the minimum standards, and like we have occupational standards now that we can use, and so it's around that. And I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I came to childcare as an untrained person, and spent 3 years working with infants and toddlers. And then from there I went to post-secondary training and got my bachelor's. So I don't want to lose the care component, and I don't want to lose, I don't want to lose anybody, and that's the way I feel. Plus our field is an inclusive field. Like we talk about inclusion, we don't want to leave anybody behind. And so that's one of the reasons why we're using appreciative inquiry. We're trying to make it as inclusive as possible, and hopefully we may be able to tease some of that out. And
speaking of the inclusion, we were talking about what's in a name. Can you speak to that?
Yes. Well, actually, the Federation and Sandy Griffin and myself wrote a paper, a dialogue paper to take across Canada. Oh gosh, it must have been about 16, 17 years ago. And it was about what's in a name. And so until we sort of, when we say let's just pick a label out of the air, and I'm not going to pick early childhood educator because probably you have a sense of that and you've actually been applying your personal definition of it because we haven't defined it totally. I haven't come to agreement on that. If this is an early childhood educator, there's no question about what you do. If we say what a nurse, this person is a nurse, we all have a collective sense of what a nurse is. And so we're working on that controlling. And again, I talk about systemic barriers. One of the ways to keep people down, let's just put it that way, is to take away their words and meanings, is to have their words and meanings defined by individuals outside of the practice. So for a long, long time, it was developmental psychologists that told us how we should be working with children, what we were, rather than it coming from ourselves. So developing consensus and, like I say, using appreciative inquiry and whatever, it's probably going to be a long haul. We've been doing it, well, I've been in the field for 45 years, and it's a conversation that never has dropped out of popularity. So I think we're evolving, and we've changed and we've grown up quite a bit, and we're getting better and really better. So
not babysitters anymore. No.
Well, you know, there's some people that take offense to that.
Yeah. And you were saying earlier you want the word care in there. It's early childhood educators.
Well, yes, I could go on to that, but
sound like, and
I'm retired, so I'm exiting, so it's not going to be my decision to make.
So I think we have to wrap up pretty soon. I was just going to go down the line. Randi, one, what do you want to be called? And two, what advice do you have? What do you have to say, like, as we move forward, what do you want these people to know? How would you share that?
Well, if I introduce myself to somebody, I often say I'm an early childhood educator, and then I usually go on to say I work in a daycare, just so they understand where that is if they don't know. I use that term because it's what most of the documentation here uses in BC, and when I was in my basic program, our instructor said, you know, usually definition, a teacher is teaching a specific grade or a specific subject, but an educator is teaching a variety of things, you know. So that seems to fit for me. Children are learning in a holistic manner. They're learning a lot of different things through play during the day, so that's what I call myself.
Right.
And moving forward, for me, I'd like to continue learning more about what's happening. I don't know much about some of the work the CCCF does, so I'd like to look more into that. I'm really curious about PEI now. I'm going to look into that a little bit, but I think I'll just keep talking to people, keep letting them know, keep informing them, and you know, especially parents and even people who aren't parents. If this $10 a day takes a decade to come into fruition, I want to be talking to 20-year-olds that might be thinking about having kids, you know, and lots of my friends or people younger than me aren't going to have children for their own choice, or just the fact that they want to stay in Vancouver when they can't afford to have a child and work and stay here. So yeah, that's my role for now.
It's more than just taking care of the kids, but really wanting to advocate, and you're wanting other people, I think, are you, it's fair to say, other early childhood educators to be advocating for yourselves?
I'm all for inclusion, much like Elaine, and the more the merrier. So yeah, if you want to get it, become more involved, ECEBC is there. There's branches all over the province. There's lots of volunteer opportunities. So yeah, it's lots of fun.
Thanks. And Val?
I think it's critically important that we move to the $10 a day plan. And the only way you're going to make that happen is to have a government that supports it. Right now, you hold the power in your hands. You get to elect your government next week. May 9th is provincial election. Take a look at party platforms. Look who supports the plan and who doesn't. It's about voting your values, right? And so that's the message that I give to my members, no matter what their profession is. Look at these political parties and look at what they are going to support and not support, and look at your values. How is it going to impact you with whatever government gets elected? So Tuesday is a very, very important day for this plan, I feel.
Great, thank you. Elaine?
Like I said, I think what important, the label, but it's also a common and collective meaning. So moving forward in Nova Scotia, we're just going to keep the dialogue open, and hopefully we'll have consensus on what the meaning is and one of the labels.
Great, thank you. And Don?
Wrap her up. Wrap her up. All right. In the absence of nothing else, I still like early childhood educator. But having said that, a school superintendent said to me at one point they tried to change grade 9, 10, 11, and 12 to senior 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it never took. Well, no kidding, right? And so he said, you guys struggled in what you call yourselves, and quite often you still get called daycare workers. Do you hear that, by the way? And well, we don't care for the day, but anyways, it is hard to change that. So, like I said, in the absence of something else, I still really like early childhood educator, if for no other reasons that let's not muddy the waters yet, okay? Second, absolutely vote. Vote, vote, vote. Vote often, whatever. But that is just, that is so important. That is so important. Get out. You vote for many reasons. This is one of them that I hope you consider, but exercise that right. And then remember these three. More and better. It is simple. More and better.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. That was great. I really appreciate all of your comments and the audience. That's good. Thank you. I think now is the next step on to, I'll pass the mic.
Thank you. And just as a token of our appreciation, we just have a little thank you gift for each of our panelists. So thank you. So I'm thrilled now to just introduce to you Gyda Chud, and she has over 45 years of experience in the early childhood sector, and she has worked directly with children in a variety of settings, instructing in the ECE program in various Lower Mainland colleges and serving as the ECE program coordinator at Vancouver Community College, and later as the Dean of Continuing Studies. Her commitment to our field really continues with her involvement on many boards, including the West Coast Child Care Resource Center and the Coalition of Child Care Advocates. Gyda was the founding chair of the Child Care Human Resources Sector Council and continues to facilitate workshops locally, provincially, and nationally. She remains passionate about activism and advocacy in early childhood. She doesn't know this, but she's actually one of my mentors. So welcome, Gyda. And she's going to be doing some tabletop activities.
So I can just kind of be on the edge.
Sorry.
Well, I have taken copious notes from our wonderful speakers and Eve's questions to them. So our time, about half an hour, is to DD, ST, and TT. I'm a big acronym lover. DD, dig deeper, ST, storytelling, and TT, table talk. And then I think I'm going to try and end with a couple of GQ. Wasn't that a guy's magazine? What's a GQ? Anyway, that's going to stand for great quotes that have, for me, really served as pillars. As everybody spoke, I was thinking of a quote to begin that you may have heard. And I always like to acknowledge and attribute a quote to whoever made it. In this case, I'm sorry, I truly don't know. The quote is, "Early childhood is not rocket science, it's way harder." And yeah, I think that that's true, not only in our day-to-day work on the floor that Randi spoke so well about, because the work is so immediate. A child says, we must respond. A child does, we have to reply. There's not really the chance of sitting in the office and say, well, you know, I'll go and check with Elaine and see what she would do. Maybe later at a staff meeting. Immediate work. However, in the larger public sector, political sector, you know, the systemic issues, the length of issues. I'm remembering my mom, who's going to be 94 years old, always taught my sister and myself, social justice is a lifelong struggle. So, Don, when you said, you know, how many years, away we go. I am going to have to really tighten on some of what I wanted to share with you. I wanted, though, to say a little bit about storytelling and how important that is, because we heard that from all our wonderful panel members. At Vancouver Community College, I went to a lunch and learn workshop. To be true, I don't exactly remember the title. Just keep that in mind. I was drawn because the facilitator was one of my profs at SFU, whom I really, really enjoyed, learned from, and adored. So the room is full, not just with early childhood people or human service care workers, digital graphics, auto body, jewelry and gemology instructors all across the map. He began by saying, all of us know how important storytelling is for young children. What we haven't recognized is how critical it is for adult learning. So I just kind of took a breath and thought, really good point. He then introduced 4 graduate students at SFU who spoke about the master's degree project they were doing, of which one component was called 4x4. So what would happen is the 4 grad students would stand outside the door of the classroom or the lecture hall. When it was over, each would come to somebody and say, can you give me 4 minutes of your time? People said, for sure. Question number 1, what was the title of today's class? Professionalism, be bold, believe in hopeful, be bold. People were in the ballpark. Nobody had it 100%. Second question, can you remember 4 facts that you learned today? Elaine told us there were 3,000 early childhood educators in Nova Scotia. Not exactly sure. Val talked about representing 18,000 people from 75, or was that 85% different professions, or how many were women? Unclear. Randi spoke about the fact that the early learning framework came out 7, 8, 9 in the ballpark. Nobody knew. And Don talked about PEI, pardon me, Quebec and Manitoba that we want to investigate, but I've forgotten who about what. They tried, nobody had the 4 facts. last question, can you remember 4 stories about today? Click, 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 click. Everybody had them. So it really reaffirmed for me the importance of stories in our work and in our lives. I'm reminded of a story that I think relates very well to professionalism and being professionals, which I know we all applaud. Sometimes, however, there is that sense of elitism with the terminology profession. And people who are in the trades or technology are not embraced as being professional. Story. Really good friend who's a lawyer was driving home in Vancouver one night down the lane to go into her parkade. Huge truck was there. Driver approached her and said, really sorry, can't move the truck for a few minutes, we're doing whatever, whatever. However, if you back up your car, do this, do that, I think you'll be fine to get down the ramp. He said, and or if you trust me, I'm happy to do it for you. She replied to him, you've given me really helpful directions. Thanks a lot. Let me give it a try. So she followed the instructions he had given, and lo and behold, all good. She ends up down the ramp. She then rolls down her window to thank him, and he replies, duh, like hardly a professional, unskilled labor. I'm just a truck driver. She says to him, and she actually gets out of her car to just be all the more forceful in her words. Listen to me, she said. You could sooner apply and be accepted to law school, graduate law school, and be accepted to the bar before I could learn to drive this truck. I thought it was a very compelling and powerful story. And so I always think about the professionalism and remind myself about people in our society who do valued critical work and yet don't have that embrace. So I think Elaine and Don both referenced what's in a name, and I remember that survey extremely well. Let's have a little bit of time for table talk. Don has said that he prefers the terminology early childhood educators. At the same time, we do absolutely hear daycare workers, early childhood teachers, child care workers, preschool teachers. So I think, as Val said, you know, we don't just have the one terminology, albeit there's nurses and then licensed practical nurses and nurse practitioners and care aides, and I'm unclear about the distinction. Interestingly, a friend shared with me, whilst I was not at the conference, that just recently Dr. Peter Moss spoke at a conference at UBC. And I really hope I'm not taking him out of context, and I'm going to study up on this. However, my understanding is that he put forward the word care does not typically bring a professional kind of a call to that word. How too sad and how too bad, and yet that may very well be true. So for some table talk, at your tables, or maybe people here can just whoosh around and chat with each other, what is for you the preferred name for people in our field, our sector, our profession, and maybe a couple of minutes of why that for you is a personal and professional choice. So we would like to get a little bit of feedback from table who would like to share, or if you had a lot of controversy, obviously not every table. Kimberly's got a roving mic for this side and I for this side. So in terms of what's in a name, anything particular shine at your table conversation? Everybody's being Shy to put up hand. Okay.
I introduced myself as a professional early childhood educator.
Patty introduces herself as a professional early childhood educator, so you build professional right into the name.
We're trying to be inclusive, and so we say child care provider or caregiver. And often that's because we're trying to keep the family child care group, who may or may not be early childhood educators, in the room. The challenge we found at our table, we talked about the slipping of the slope into responsible adults and to educating assistants. So we're actually worried about losing the professionalism instead of the other way around. So we talked about that a bit.
Thank you. So two really key themes there for us, which I think the panel lifted up. On the one hand, the inclusivity, wherein we want to embrace people who are in the family child care, home care kind of sector, after school care, child aid care, pardon me, and also maybe the losing of some ground with responsible adult. What's that all about? Not much. And assistant. Kimberly, somebody there?
Hi, everyone. I was just sharing a story with my table about it happened actually not too long ago, and I was introducing an old friend of mine stopped by my center, and I had my coworkers there, and we had two parents actually, and what happened was we were discussing, I was introducing, and we were talking about what all of us did, and I said, oh, you know, like she says, I said, no, this is my friend, and she's a preschool teacher, and she said, and then we ended up anyways having a conversation between one of us was a preschool teacher, one of us was a daycare person, and then we had this discussion about, you know, the different labels of our names, and the parent says, well, no matter what, you all love children. And it really hit me, because I thought, yeah, and we all sort of looked at each other and thought, yeah, we do. We all love children. We all love working with children. And so what came from that is our table really decided we do love the early childhood educator, because it does encompass, you know, all of those different areas. You know, for us now, it still does. So that's just what came from it for our table. Yeah, thank you.
I just found doing the pedagogical narrations, connecting to the learning framework, put a lot of weight behind what we do.
Connecting to the early learning framework.
Hi. I just wanted to speak to the fact that here in British Columbia, our first year as an early childhood educator is labeled as basic. I think that's where we need to start. That needs to change.
Okay, so the word basic.
So your first year, well, yeah, she and Randi said it a few times, that during her basic course.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely right. Language frames and defines so often our thinking. What comes to mind immediately is when the Center for Disability changed to Center for Ability. Still, basic, really good point, wants to move and change, and post-basic, special needs. We're still using that terminology, wherein a lot of people are using special rights. So there could be a whole big discussion about all of that.
In response to what you were saying about the basic, I renewed my ECE license recently, and in the past it's always come back as license to practice. This time it came back saying certificate, and I thought, wow, I have my ECE, my infant toddler, and my special needs, and how does the government acknowledge me? Certificate.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hello. Talking about the terminology, my choice would be early childhood educator. And is it Randi? Randi said when she's asked, she says, I'm an early childhood educator and I work in daycare. And when I'm asked, I say, I'm an early childhood educator and I'm a preschool teacher. And it's odd because we are all early childhood educators, and we feel that along with our title of early childhood educator, we must also say where we work. If you're a nurse, you would say, I'm a nurse. So I think early childhood educator describes us all, and we should stop feeling the need to say where we work, unless asked.
Really interesting point. And yet, as we've heard from people, because not everybody in the greater public sphere is familiar with the term, then Randi gets underneath it and said, I work at a daycare. Or somebody who works at a preschool will say, I work at a preschool. And then a lot of people won't know the difference between preschool, daycare.
So I think at our table we decided that early childhood educator that's what we should just be saying. I said that I like to include my specialization. I'd be like, yeah, I am an ECE with my specialization in inclusive care. And it just sort of kind of came up. They were like, do you just sort of say that for yourself? I'm like, well, yeah, I like to hear myself talk. But but I feel like it's really important to say that you have that specialization. In other professional situations, if you're a lawyer, you're like, well, I specialize in criminal law. If I'm a dermatologist, I'm also a doctor, but I specialize in skin. Why wouldn't I tell people my specialization and not be proud of that? Like, why wouldn't I be like how are you going to get respect if you're not proud of where you come from and be like, yeah, I did this, and I'm not better than anyone else that doesn't have it. I just had a passion, and I worked for it, and I'm just a little bit more enthusiastic about it.
Pursuing your passion, and I'm reminded when we were trying to think of the title in our early work at the Child Care Human Resource Sector Council, Aretha. R-E-S-P-E-C-T, find out what it means to me. We were kind of all standing up and doing the little Aretha dance. I was very interested, Val, when you talked about, and Elaine as well, the distinctions between a college and how a union can be advocating, protecting, representing members who have been found to be unprofessional in their behavior. Wonderful Gail Davies, who you will meet tonight, just sent me this. Some of you may have seen it just recently in the National Post. Headline, she's only 4. Montreal parents livid after daughter forced to scrub her own pee. Listen to this for 2 minutes. The parents of a Montreal pre-kindergarten child want a school board to act after their 4-year-old daughter was forced to clean up her own urine following an accident on the playground. Cindy Moisey, mother, says the daycare supervisor gave her daughter a brush, a bucket of soapy water, and had her scrub the spot on all 4s before bringing her inside to change her during the lunch hour. In an interview, Mosi said she has since met with officials at the school and claims that the supervisor was, quote, totally unapologetic. She said the employee called her method, quote, educational, and that the scrubbing was merely symbolic. Moisey said she's angry that her daughter was humiliated and wants the employee, dismissed. I have a lot of anger because I do not understand somebody who works with children and proclaims to love children can tell me that this is educational. For me, someone who works with kids, this is so not the right approach. We don't act that way in 2017. What did Trudeau say? The girl's father described the treatment as completely unacceptable. Mosi, who sits on the school's governing board and has another older child who also attends the same institution, is adamant that action be taken. Quote, the daycare supervisor had no remorse, She told us it's our way of perceiving the situation. If you tell me that that's okay, what the hell else is being done that this teacher would qualify as, quote, educational, and that we have absolutely no idea about? Shocking story, huh?
I watched that on the news last night, and when the two of you, or three of you, I guess, were talking about colleges, that was what came to mind. Shouldn't we be preventing those situations? And even, I think, places, or professions rather, that have colleges, that happens too. Any profession, you will get bad apples, for lack of a better term, and ours is no different. But who is going to remove that person from that situation? Yeah.
Elaine,
Right now in Nova Scotia, it's the licensing board, because the regulations, that would be a contravention of the regulations about how staff should behave, and so that center's license would be in jeopardy.
I was just going to say, we already have that, because our code of ethics says that early childhood educators work in ways that enhance human dignity, and that doesn't enhance human dignity, and that would trump what you feel is educational. So we already have this in place. I don't know what it's like wherever that article was written, but that would go straight to the ECE registry here, and you would lose your license.
Absolutely. So the incident took place in Montreal, where we tend to think the advancements have been great. And yet, as Randi says, within every profession there will be some bad apples. What I'm intrigued by is how this particular ECE tried to rationalize or defend her behavior by calling it educational. So indeed, we have the Code of Ethics. And I just also have an acronym in my head about ETHICS. It's absolutely true, though, that it's simple to just name that we support human dignity. Once we dig deeper and get underneath that, I think we start to lift issues.
I just wanted to say, we were talking about the title of EC and all of this, but I think it's really important. And we were talking about being segregated within our own communities. I think if we stay strong together, mentor each other. I've been in the field for 35 years and helped teach early learners and mentoring people. If we don't stay strong together, supporting each other and teaching early childhood educators that, hey, maybe there's another way of looking at things, I think we can't be strong as a whole.
Stronger together, absolutely.
I call myself an early child educator because that's what's on my certificate, but that's not what I do. I am caring for children, and there's not enough value placed on the word care. We don't educate as much as we care. There is value in care. Care is at the core of what we do. Care is our curriculum. But unfortunately in society, unless we say we're educating, there's no value placed on that. Well, I'm proud to say I care for children. I'm in child care. I'm an early childhood educator, and I care.
Stronger together, and a really solid statement about we're proud of caring. It's at the root of what we do.
I just want to add a little something to that. Elaine Fergusson from Don's home province wrote an excellent piece in a book, and what she talks about is that we care for and we care about children, and I've always used that, and that's so key. So I'm in agreement with you. I like to keep the care piece in it, but I'm retiring, so it's not my decision to make.
Care for and care about. One of the things I hoped we could do at our tables, however I see time is escaping, was talk about some of these foundational pillars that I think when many of you spoke, you actually came back to. And in my heart and in my head, I have a number of foundational pillars about our early childhood profession and sector. One, if you can just visually imagine a triangle that I like to call the AKS triangle. Don was right. He asked, how many of us are paid what we're worth? RESPECT, no. So we have to look, what is it that drew us into the early childhood field? And so the A stands for attitudes, values, and beliefs. Values and beliefs are often used synonymously. I learned, though, that values are those things we hold to be important. Beliefs are those things we hold to be true. So, of course, they come together. And yet, the minute we step into a child care environment, just like the parent who said you are amazing, we recognize that while our values and beliefs of caring for and caring about are solid as can be, we need some K, which is the knowledge. And so then we pursue our studies in early childhood, and we pursue, bad word as it is, post-basic continuing education, professional development, like the conference gives us. Top of the triangle, the S is for skills. The attitude and knowledge is only as good as we can translate or transform it into our everyday practice with children, with coworkers, colleagues, and with parents. And I would often say, think about your own educational experience. Hopefully all of you could name some fabulous teachers you had, even their name, and you can visually see them in your mind. Majority of people say, yeah, I had a lot of okay teachers, weren't fabulous, weren't horrible. Okay. Everybody can name and think about teachers who were truly terrible. And particularly in the high school setting, right? Don and Elaine, everybody's shaking head. Particularly in the high school setting, when I think about it, it wasn't because they didn't know their chemistry, math, biology, history, French or English, whatever subject they taught. They had the knowledge. What was missing was the attitude and the skill. Not really a respect for the students in the class, not finding ways to try and make it engaging, interesting, activities happening about, and so on. So there were 5 more of my foundational pillars I wanted to share. However, no time for that. It's okay, totally okay. My problem is I talk too much. I do know that about myself. Somebody once said in an evaluation, you came at us like a machine gun. I'm like, what? In early childhood, a machine gun? I had an incredible experience going through some materials thinking about today. Whilst I hadn't met Randi and Val before, I did know, Elaine and Don, and actually met Eva at an all candidates meeting a little while ago. I found a handwritten talk that I had made 21 years ago, where I had a number of quotes that still really remain very central for me today. And I think they're particularly relevant in this conversation. The first came from the president and founder of the Canadian Council. Sorry. I'll just read the quote. She told us, working for social justice is like taking a bath. If we don't do it every day, we start to stink. The other was from a very, very early ECEBC conference in Victoria, and I listed here as having happened in the early 70s. You may again have heard this quote. Snowflakes are among the most fragile things on earth, yet look what happens when they stick together. So even though we did not get the thunderstorm last night, actually I was hoping for it because I thought it would fit today, let's follow up to say we are going to create a snowstorm on May the 9th. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Gyda. Like I said, I take, whenever I hear Gyda talking, little quotes and acronyms, and the latest one is the one about the bath and the stink, so I'm going to have to get that from you again. But talking about Stronger Together, the Canadian Child Care Advocates of BC is going to be here at lunchtime in the lobby talking about the plan. They have some signs, so make sure that you're adding to it. So there'll be some great discussion, and I think that just ties nicely with Stronger Together. And with that, we do have our AGM today here at 1 o'clock, and that's a good opportunity as well to become involved with our organization and to have your voices heard.